we're dealing with a rookie running back now, Dave, that's going to be very prominent for a lot of fantasy managers in Isaac Guerendo, because without McCaffrey, without Jordan Mason, Guerendo now steps into the starting role for the 49ers, and he has an opportunity here to be a league winner rest of the way. We'll see what Patrick Taylor does in terms of being the second guy. They're probably going to add somebody else. We talked about it on our Fantasy Football Today podcast. You gave a great list of names. Matt Breida is somebody that makes a lot of sense. He was with them in camp. Obviously knows the system's been successful for the 49ers in years past. But in terms of Isaac Guerendo now, spend all of your fab, but how good can he be, Dave, heading into this important Week 14 game against the Chicago Bears?
If you've been around football long enough, you know that Kyle Shanahan's track record with running backs is almost unblemished. It's outstanding. And we've already seen it this year. Remember Jordan Mason at the beginning of this year? No one knew who Jordan Mason was. And he went out and he was like a number one running back for fantasy managers to begin the season. There have only been 3 games this year where a 49ers running back hasn't had at least 15 touches in a game. 2 of the 3 times when it's happened have been injury involved. So meaning the starter gets hurt. Remember the game where Mason got hurt, Guerendo came in, ran for a bunch of yards. That's why his rushing average is so high. He had a big run in that game, but that's what he's capable of doing. He knows this scheme well. He's going to be a good fit. This is at least a number 2 fantasy running back moving forward, Jamie.
Yeah, you're referencing the Seattle game. He had 10 carries for 99 yards, a 76-yard run in the fourth quarter there. And then the game against Dallas, I think, is the kind of game you're hoping for Guerendo. 14 carries, 85 yards, and a touchdown. Had 3 catches in that game. That's not something we saw a lot from Mason. And I think we're going to have to see the other guys in San Francisco step up, specifically Deebo Samuel. He's been struggling lately. Getting Trent Williams back, if he's able to return, dealing with a personal issue on top of an ankle injury, would be huge for the 49ers down the stretch. The schedule's favorable for Isaac Guerendo. So, again, spend whatever fab you need to get him. This is a gift for fantasy managers, an unfortunate one for those with Christian McCaffrey, but a gift for fantasy managers to get a running back with the potential of Isaac Guerendo to close the season. The rest of the running backs to add, nowhere near the potential of Guerendo, but we do recommend getting a lot of your handcuffs if you have the ability to do so now heading into the fantasy playoffs. So you'll see a lot of the names on this list. Not a lot of guys you'll be comfortable starting, but guys like Trey Benson, Ray Davis, who we saw once upon a time against the Jets earlier this season when James Cook missed the game, can be a starting fantasy option if something were to happen to Cook. Obviously, Saquon Barkley's been a superstar. Kenneth Gainwell would be in the same line like Isaac Guerendo if Barkley were to miss any time. So handcuff your guys if you can. But let's talk about the Chargers situation, because last week we were saying Gus Edwards was the running back to add because J.K. Dobbins had a knee injury. Then during the week he's placed on IR, and everybody, for the most part, kept Gus Edwards, but also started to pick up Kimani Vidal. He's still available in a lot of leagues, Dave. And we did not see a good rushing performance from either guy taking on the Falcons this week. But I do think it's worth if you have the roster space to pick up Vidal, because Gus Edwards is who he is. He's a plotter. He's not going to work in the passing game. Maybe Vidal can take over and do some things in his backfield that we haven't seen yet, similar to what J.K. Dobbins was doing.
Well, I wish that he had even like 50% of the talent that J.K. Dobbins had. But when you watch Kimani Vidal play, he looks like Gus Edwards out there. And I think there's a reason why Gus plays ahead of Vidal. Certainly experience is a factor. Pass protection is a factor. His knowing of the offense. He's been with this coordinator for a long time. And you saw it play out in the game. Vidal barely played more than 25% of the snaps last week. I don't know if that changes. I don't know if he's got that upside as far as talent goes to be that guy. You want to put him on your bench. You don't want to get one of these other handcuffed running backs, these lottery ticket guys. That's fine. But not only is Vidal a problem, that offensive line's a problem for the Chargers. They should have been able to run wild against the Falcons, and they couldn't get it done. So I'm a little standoffish. If you've already got Gus Edwards, I don't mind keeping him. If you've already got Vidal, go ahead and stick with him for a while. But there's other running backs that are on your list that I might be a little more interested in stashing.
All right, Falcons' run defense actually has been relatively good for the majority of the season, but they also have a brutal matchup coming up in Week 14 against the Chiefs. So you're not going to want to start either of the Chargers running backs if Gus Edwards is still available in 10-team leagues. Let's look at the wide receivers, and let's keep in mind there are 6 teams on a bye. I know we're all focused on the 49ers and their injuries. You've got a lot of bye week stars to replace here with the players who are missing. So at the wide receiver position, you see the names that we're looking to add here. Headlined by Elijah Moore. Now, there's 2 things to keep in mind here with Elijah Moore. First off, Cedric Tillman did not play in this breakout game for Jameis Winston and the Browns receiving corps against the Broncos, dealing with a concussion. He's now out for a game and a half based on when he got hurt in Week 12. So we'll see if he's able to return in week 14 against the Steelers. And it is the Steelers. I know the game was in the snow in week 11 when these two teams met, but it's still a very good defense that this Browns offense is facing. That being said, Jameis Winston has had 3 good games of the 5 starts that he's made, and Elijah Moore has had 3 good games of the 5 starts that Jameis has made. So they almost go hand in hand. When Jameis is playing well, Elijah Moore is playing well also. Dave, do you look at Elijah Moore as a starter with or without Tillman taking on the Steelers this week?
I definitely in PPR leagues, probably more of a low-end starter, like a number 3 receiver if Tillman's back. But if Tillman's out, I think you absolutely have to keep him in your lineup. More I'm talking about in those catch-related formats. And listen, Jameis Winston is going to throw the ball 35-plus times. There's going to be a lot of volume there. You saw him throw 58 times against Denver. And Denver, I think Denver's defense might be better than Pittsburgh's defense, Jamie. And you saw what Jameis Winston did there. A lot of good, some bad, cost Cleveland the game. But I also think it helped fantasy managers as far as the receivers and the tight ends go. I would buy into that with Elijah Moore.
Yeah, Jameis has actually been 41 pass attempts or more in every game not in the snow. I will say this, the version of the Steelers defense he's going to face is better than what the Broncos version that he saw last night without Riley Moss there, because that's not the same defense in the secondary. Levi Wallace is not Riley Moss, and that's why they will have so much success that they had throwing the ball on that side of the football. Let's talk about the Panthers receiving core here, because Bryce Young is actually playing very good over the last month, coming off his best game of the season, arguably his best game of his career, as he beat up the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, Adam Thielen, 7 games removed from his hamstring injury, didn't look great in the first game that we saw in week 12, but was awesome in week 13. You see here with 10 targets, 8 catches, 99 yards, and the touchdown. Could have had 2 touchdowns, but the play was overturned in the back of the end zone. Is Adam Thielen now a not only must roster player, but must start player heading into a tough matchup in week 14 against the Eagles?
No, if I'm Adam Thielen, it's to be depth on my fantasy team for the rest of the season. I don't want to use him in week 14. Nick Westbrook-Ikine looks like a more appealing option to me based on his matchup in week 14 than Adam Thielen. And I would consider stashing Keon Coleman ahead of both of these guys. But you've got to give credit where it's due. Thielen did look good as far as just like being able to get open, be the short area target, and then catch a deep ball late from Bryce Young. That wasn't a favorable matchup. As the matchups get tougher, I'm not sure that Adam Thielen will necessarily be certainly as efficient, but the volume should still be there. So I don't mind him on my bench as a wide receiver in PPR leagues, as someone that might be able to get me 8 to 13 PPR points in a matchup, but I don't want to start him this week against Philadelphia. That defense is too good.
You mentioned Nick Westbrook-Ikine has got 7 touchdowns in he's got a touchdown in 7 of his last 8 games, 8 touchdowns over that span, and at least 61 yards receiving in 2 of his last 3 games, taking on Jacksonville in week 14. It's a very favorable matchup for Will Levis, who we'll talk about coming up in a little bit. Some wide receivers that you might be moving on from in week 14. Remember, you got these teams on a bye, so factor that in. So Tank Dell not going to play, obviously struggling lately. Amari Cooper, more of a 10-team league drop than a 12-team league drop, but not getting the job done so far in Buffalo, especially the last 2 games. Now, one was in the snow against San Francisco. The previous game prior to their bye was against Kansas City, so take that into account. Tyler Lockett's been a disappearing act for the Seahawks down the stretch, and an easy wide receiver to move on from. Let's talk about the tight ends, and here are the guys that you're looking to add for week 14. And again, some prominent tight ends that are not going to be available to you on a bye. Now, you see 2 Cowboys tight ends listed here, and that's by design because Jake Ferguson has missed the last 2 games with a concussion. So if he's out, Luke Schoonmaker has been 8+ PPR points in the 3 games that either Ferguson was injured or missed. And the reason we like the Cowboys tight ends is because the matchup against Cincinnati is unbelievable. We just saw Pat Freiermuth have a big game against the Bengals. They are top 3 in terms of most fantasy points allowed to opposing tight ends. So Dave, if it is Ferguson or Schoonmaker, let's just say it's a clear-cut starter, are you starting the Cowboys tight end against the Bengals on Monday night?
Absolutely. Should be a great opportunity for one of these guys to go out there and get at least 10 PPR points. And I think if I have to sort of manage this, do I want to pick up both these guys and carry them both all the way up until the game on Sunday and then figure out which one to start? I don't want to do that. I think I would go and get you know what I would do, Jamie? I would get Ferguson first. And if he starts practicing as soon as Wednesday, then I know that he's got a great chance to be the guy. If he doesn't practice by Wednesday, by Thursday, then that's when I might pivot to Schoonmaker and use him as a replacement in week 14.
And look, if somebody beats you a Schoonmaker, you got Noah Gray, who's got 9+ PPR points in 3 games in a row. You have even Tyler Conklin, great matchup against the Dolphins. They've allowed 8 or more PPR points to 5 tight ends in their last 4 games. So there are some cheaper pivot plays. Juwan Johnson is going to get a big boost because of the Taysom Hill injury. So there are guys that you could still pivot to if you can't get your hands on one of the Cowboys guys. But I agree with you. You get Ferguson first. And Pat Freiermuth is another tight end to go target as well. He's got 9 PPR points or more in back-to-back games. And one of those games was against Cleveland in Week 12 where he had 4 catches for 59 yards. I do think there's a little bit of a bump coming here because of Calvin Austin, who's dealing with a concussion and may not play in Week 14. He's been a guy that Russell Wilson has leaned on in the middle of the field. We know that's not an area he likes to throw to. But we could see a Browns secondary here that's a little bit banged up. Grant Delpit was checked for a concussion. Ward was dealing with a calf injury. Both those guys may not play in Week 14. But even if they're out there, though, Dave, I think Freiermuth is a low-end starter this week with all the teams on a bye.
9.9 PPR points or more in 3 of his past 4 games, so there is something to it. I do feel like he's a little bit more of a touchdown or bust type of fantasy tight end. But if the Steelers don't just lean on the run and kind of have a conservative game plan against Cleveland, then I could easily see Pat Freiermuth having a decent game. I'd still rather have the Cowboys tight end, though, whoever it may be, going up against the Bengals.
And even Will Dissly taking on the Chiefs because you may not have Ladd McConkey there. So great matchup against Kansas City as well. Let's take a look at the quarterbacks here, and we have a couple of guys that are potential starting options. You have few deep league guys as well. Cooper Rush and Aiden O'Connell, great matchups. O'Connell gets the Bucks, and Cooper Rush gets the Bengals. Quarterbacks have just been feasting on those 2 teams lately. But in terms of Jameis Winston, he did not have a great game against the Steelers the first time around in Week 12. That was in the snow, one of his worst games so far. The other game they struggled against was against the Chargers. But you mentioned it before, Dave, the volume. It's been 41 passes or more in 4 of the 5 starts, the non-snow games. He's been throwing the ball a lot, coming off a 50-plus pass attempt game against the Broncos. And so even in a tough matchup, Dave, you think he's a must-start quarterback?
I don't know if he's a must-start. He's going to be just outside my top 12 in my rankings, but I do buy into how he finished that game against the Steelers. And yes, the conditions were terrible. He was throwing it around by the end of that game, Jamie, and I wonder if he does that for 4 quarters against the Steelers on Sunday, then maybe he does end up having a decent stat line, even though he's going to have good volume. Look, his receivers are playing great. He's finding a way to find the end zone. I don't think Cleveland's going to be able to run the ball on Pittsburgh. It just sets up for Jameis Winston to have another game with 41 attempts, 275-plus yards, a couple of touchdowns, a couple of turnovers, too.
Yeah, he is a top 12 quarterback for me, and hopefully the volume will carry him to another strong day. And Will Levis is a borderline top 12 guy for me, Dave. I just love the matchup against Jacksonville. He's playing much better of late. 2 of his 3 games that he's returned from the shoulder injury, over 20 fantasy points. And this matchup against Jacksonville is absolutely fantastic. His receivers are starting to play well, specifically Nick Westbrook-Akine. And so I don't think the Jaguars will slow him down. So if you are stuck at the position, you can't get your hands on Jameis, maybe Caleb Williams is out there and you can't find him. Will Levis has a great schedule rest of season, including 2 games against the Jaguars heading into this week and then the Week 17 Fantasy Championship. All right, that'll do it for us here on Fantasy Football Today. Make sure you check out our Fantasy Football Today podcast. We're going to help you dominate your fantasy leagues. We do it better than anybody else. We're on the air all the time. Scan the QR code to get your easy access to the podcast. You can check us out on YouTube as well. Check out the Waiver Wire column on CBSSports.com as well, and we'll help you win your leagues in Week 14.